In a new op-ed penned by conservative Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, he argues that he will not be supporting the For the People Act, which of course is a robust election reform bill that it has already passed in the House. And he says that he plans to maintain the Senate filibuster, which requires 60 votes in order to pass any piece of legislation. In essence, it will block any type of legislation that the Biden administration at least pretends wants to pass. Now, of course, there are exceptions when it comes to reconciliation, which allows some legislation to pass with a simple majority. But whenever you have discussions about that, all of a sudden you hear the Democrats talk about the Senate parliamentarian who says there are limits to that. Obviously, that's arbitrary, could be overruled, but Democrats don't do it. Now, his op-ed, in case you guys want to read this garbage, is in the Charleston Gazette-Mail, and it's titled, "Why I'm Voting Against the For the People Act." And here's the hollow argument he makes. Unfortunately, we now are witnessing that the fundamental right to vote has itself become overtly politicized. Today's debate about how to best protect our right to vote and to hold elections, however, is not about finding common ground, but seeking partisan advantage. Whether it is the state laws that seek to needlessly restrict voting or politicians who ignore the need to secure our elections, partisan policymaking won't instill confidence in our democracy, it will destroy it. And then he goes on to argue this, and it's incredibly frustrating that he continues to do this. "I believe that partisan voting legislation will destroy the already weakening binds of our democracy, and for that reason, I will vote against the For the People Act. Furthermore, I will not vote to weaken or eliminate the filibuster." Now, the reason why I say these arguments are hollow is because he has been proven on multiple occasions that Republicans are not in fact good faith actors and they do not take part in good faith negotiations. After securing concessions on behalf of Senate Republicans, not a single one of them voted in favor of the stimulus relief bill that Biden had put forward. And of course, he couldn't get Republicans to vote in favor of a commission to investigate the riots that took place in the nation's capital on January 6th. The real reasoning has to do with money in politics and who butters Joe Manchin's bread. And Jane Mayer from The New Yorker had a fantastic piece about that. I will give you the details, but Cenk, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in first.
Yeah, so if you're part of the press and you're continuing the mirage that Joe Manchin is representing his voters, please stop and do your job. So I see it all the time. It's because he's from West Virginia, it's a very red state, voted for Trump, so that's why he has to do this. Wait. That editorial was about For the People Act. For the People Act in West Virginia has a popularity of 71%. Well, okay, let's be fair now. Trump won the state big. Well, first of all, that is the whole state. It's 71% of the whole state. But okay, let's look at the Trump voters. 66% say yes. It's the only Democratic legislation that they support. That's not true. The other one they support in West Virginia, $15 minimum wage. Guess who voted against that? Joe Manchin. Okay, now why do they support it? Because it has excellent anti-corruption legislation in there. And Jane Mayer explains that a little bit, and I'll get into it, etc. But the main part of it is it puts a spotlight on what used to be dark money. And so it reveals their donors. That is exactly why Joe Manchin is against it. Okay, now, as again, and I'll get into it in a little bit, there's actually 10 Democratic senators, according to the Washington Post, who actually agree with Manchin. They don't want their donors exposed either. Now, on this show, we told you that the Democrats, not the Republicans, the Democrats wouldn't pass For the People Act without at least taking out the anti-corruption parts. You know why? Because they're corrupt. That's why. It's very easy. Yet, other than Jane Mayer, almost every reporter writes, Joe Manchin, West Virginia, red state, they love corruption there, they hate higher wages, Joe Manchin's just representing them. No, stop lying on his behalf. Right. Joe Manchin is not doing this out of principle. He's doing it because he's a corrupt politician who takes tons and tons of corporate donor money, and he doesn't want you to know it. That's the reality.
Now, Jane Mayer's piece primarily focuses on Senate Republicans, but toward the end of her piece, she does address the fact that Joe Manchin is very much corrupted by the same groups that are funded by Koch Industries. So, as she reports, a recording obtained by the New Yorker of a private conference call on January 8th between a policy advisor to Senator Mitch McConnell and the leaders of several prominent conservative groups, including one run by the Koch brothers network, reveals the participants' worry that the proposed election reforms garner wide support, not just from liberals, but from conservative voters too. And so they're having a discussion about how to defeat this bill. Obviously, the Koch Industries does not want to get rid of money in politics. That's the way they've been able to essentially get lawmakers to bend to their will as opposed to represent the best interests of the American people and their constituents. And so the speakers on the call expressed alarm about the broad popularity of this bill, and they're talking about various focus groups that they've done to try to, I guess, tailor their messaging in order to persuade American voters to dislike the bill, to avoid supporting the bill. And so Kyle McKenzie, a research director for the Koch-run advocacy group Stand Together, told fellow conservatives and Republican congressional staffers on that call that, quote, when presented with a very neutral description of the bill, people were generally supportive. The most worrisome part is that conservatives were actually as supportive as the general public was when they read the neutral description. There's a large, very large chunk of conservatives who are supportive of these types of efforts. And he even complained that when they tried to use cancel culture narratives, anti-cancel culture narratives, in order to persuade voters to be against it, it didn't work. The participants conceded that the bill, which would stem the flow of dark money from such political donors as the billionaire oil magnate Charles Koch, was so popular that it wasn't worth trying to mount a public advocacy campaign to shift opinion. Instead, a senior Koch operative said that the opponents would be better off ignoring the will of American voters and trying to kill the bill in Congress. So what does this all have to do with Joe Manchin, right? This is a meeting with Koch-backed groups and conservative lawmakers. Well, remember, grifting is the only thing in Washington that happens to be bipartisan, right? So as Jane Mayer tweeted, the leaked Heritage Foundation tape specifically mentions how the right-wing dark money groups had a little fun pressuring Manchin on SB1, and SB1 is the For the People Act, the Senate version of the For the People Act. And Brian Schwartz, a reporter from CNBC, said, plus, Koch operatives recently met with Manchin's team on the telehealth stance. It can't be ruled out that they possibly spoke with them about the opposition to For the People Act. And as Cenk mentioned, I think it's really the most important point. Manchin himself takes dark money, as other corporate Democrats do. So he's not only in touch with these Koch-backed groups, but he's looking out for his own campaign finance. He wants to ensure that he protects the dark money that flows into his campaigns, and that's the reason why he's gonna go ahead and not only vote against the reform, but do what he can to ensure that the filibuster remains in place so the legislation gets blocked.
Yeah, so a couple of other important aspects of this. Number one, I thought that Joe Manchin couldn't be pressured, that we shouldn't even try as Democrats to pressure Joe Manchin. That's funny, because it turns out the Koch brothers and the Heritage Foundation, et cetera, pressured Joe Manchin, and he gave in instantly. He gave in instantly. Then they pulled the ads off the air because they're like, high five, Joe Manchin, now you're on the right side. Now, they didn't need to pressure him because he wants to hide his donors, okay? But it was gratuitous on top. But there's another part of HR1, SB1, For the People Act. These are all the same bill that is also part of the anti-corruption that they don't like. I talked to Harvard Law professor Larry Lessig about it over a month ago. And he explained the best part of it is the matching funds. That means that grassroots candidates can have a chance against incumbents. Another reason why corporate Democrats hate it. So they all pretend to be, oh, Joe, we are for democracy and voting rights and let's clean up, because they didn't think they were gonna pass it. Now all of a sudden they have the House, the Senate, and the White House, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, passing anti-corruption bills. We don't really want to do that. Manchin, go out there and pretend that you're the only one, okay? And so not only are there 10 Democratic senators that also don't want to pass it, that are all hiding, but you guys want to guess what Joe Biden's position on the filibuster is? And if you can't break the filibuster, you can't have the For the People Act, let alone every other part of his agenda. You know that right now, Joe Biden is in favor of keeping the filibuster?
Of course. course.
So we're all talking about Joe Manchin as if it's like, oh my God, Joe Manchin. No, it's Joe Biden. It's Joe Biden hiding behind Joe Manchin. FDR 2.0. I think they invented LOL for that very statement. And it was even progressives in Congress and in Washington, the groups talking about how he's FDR 2.0. Are you guys kidding me?
Come on.
What kind of a joke is that? And Biden doesn't want grassroots funding of his primary opponents either. None of them want, and they don't want you to see their donors. This is the one thing that Trump voters are right about. They hate the corruption too. So the great irony of all this is Joe Biden's perpetual excuse, including that op-ed, for not ending the filibuster or voting for the People Act is because he wants to be bipartisan. Well, we have bipartisan agreement in West Virginia and across the country. For the People Act is enormously popular with both Democratic and Republican voters. Who's killing bipartisanship? Ironically, Joe Manchin and Joe Biden.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, when you hear about the need for bipartisanship, right? Who cares about whether or not Democratic and Republican lawmakers get along? I don't care about that at all. Bipartisanship should only matter in regard to the will of the people. And if there's widespread popularity for this election reform bill, in addition to Joe Biden's infrastructure bill, in addition to his American Families Plan, those are popular pieces of legislation. And it's not just, hey, it would be nice if we get this legislation passed. This is an important moment, right? Like, the Democrats are going to lose control of Congress in the midterm elections. So time is limited. If Democrats fail to accomplish this agenda, I guarantee you it's gonna be much easier for Republicans to make their case in the general election. And I don't know what the future holds if that happens. Like, how do you dig yourself out, or how do you get yourself out of that giant hole that you've dug yourself into?
That leads to one more hypocrisy from Joe Manchin, which is he said, well, look, voting rights is too important to mess with on a partisan level. But the Republicans already did it. They passed dozens of laws in the states messing with voting rights. And the Democrats aren't messing with voting rights. They're saying everybody should be allowed to vote. That's the opposite of messing with voting rights. Now, when I say Democrats, I mean the honest Democrats. I don't know what percentage of the party it is. It might be a really small percentage, but at least the bill itself, the one they were pretending to support, For the People Act, does not mess with voting rights. It gives voting rights to everyone who deserves it, who are citizens, and it is very careful about that, right? And so if Manchin says, I don't want voting rights messed with, and the Republicans have already done it at the state level, curtailing voting for so many different groups, by saying, I'm not going to touch it, you are messing with voting rights. You are making it partisan. You're letting the Republicans' attack on voting rights stand. Every part of what Joe Manchin says is disingenuous. You need to understand that. And then that, by the way, I want to give credit to Jane Mayer, because I always say, like, can't one reporter actually cover the donors, which is the real issue in this country? Jane Mayer covers it all the time. She does a brilliant job. She found the tape of them talking about how we couldn't possibly win with the American people. So I think that she called it they call it under the dome strategy.
Yes.
So they got to go to the under the dome strategy, which means the under the dome of the Capitol. Yeah. So that means screw the voters.
Yep.
We're just going to go for the corrupt politicians, which we own, like Joe Manchin, a lot of the corporate Democrats, and all of the Republicans. Don't lose track of that. All of the Republicans, they say, don't worry, all the Republicans will hold under the dome, because they have no inclination to support their actual voters. This is part of why Trump got so popular, because the Republican voters also knew that the corporate Republicans, which is the entirety of the party, are sellout, corrupt crooks. So when they had a choice of 17 people, they're like, well, they're all crooks, except Trump, I don't know, right? I know him from the reality show, and he's rich, maybe he doesn't need to be corrupt. And he's running on Drain the Swamp. And I know for a fact the rest of them are crooks. Well, you were right, not about Trump, but the rest of them are crooks. And so are the Democrats that are going along with this. And yet, look, who do you see in the media, other than Jane Mayer and us? Who do you see saying Joe Manchin obviously lying? There's a poll in his state about this act. and there's a poll in the country. It is the least bipartisan thing he could do. No, every stupid reporter parrots his talking point. Because Joe Manchin wants bipartisanship, because Joe Manchin wants to support the voters of West Virginia, you're actively lying on his behalf. Thank you, Jane Mayer, for being an actual journalist.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.